It began with a yawn. Silent. Accidental. Barely noticed. But in the cloistered silence of 17th century Spain, it was the kind of sin that echoed. A young nun, worn thin by sleepless nights and relentless prayer, closed her eyes. And moments later, they came for her. She hadn't blasphemed. She hadn't fled the convent. She hadn't even spoken out loud. Her crime was far simpler and far more dangerous. She had dared to fall asleep during prayer. What followed was not just punishment. It was purification, or so the inquisitors claimed. The nun, whose name we almost lost to time, was placed under investigation. And what began as drowsiness ended in a courtroom of shadow, ritual, and pain. But to understand what happened to her, you have to understand the world she lived in. Not just the violence of the Inquisition, but the everyday life of a woman cloistered from the world. So, imagine yourself there. It's still dark when the bell tolls. The convent is cold, stone corridors that never quite warm, even in summer. You rise from a straw-stuffed mattress. The cell is small, a single wooden cross above the bed. No mirror, no vanity, no softness, only devotion. You don't speak. Silence is part of your vow. You dress in the same rough wool habit as the day before. The cloth is coarse, and the rope around your waist reminds you to restrain desire. This, after all, is a life of mortification. Barefoot, you walk toward the chapel. Other sisters glide past in silence, heads bowed. The air smells of wax and old incense. The sound of sandals and whispered prayers echoes in long stone hallways. You enter the chapel as the first light of dawn filters through iron-barred windows. There are no stained glass saints here, just shadow and devotion. You kneel. You cross yourself, and the liturgy begins. The chants are in Latin. You understand some of it. But understanding isn't the point. Repetition is. Discipline is. This is how the mind is kept focused. Or, in some cases, broken. After prayer comes the first meal. It is quiet, eaten without words. Bread soaked in weak broth. You are expected to be thankful, to eat humbly, to feel blessed by your hunger. Afterwards, work. Always work. Some scrub floors. Others tend gardens. You are assigned to laundry, brutal, boiling work. You've burned your fingers more than once. But no one complains. Complaints are a sin of pride. Besides, this is part of your spiritual purification. The day stretches long. The hours are divided into canonical segments, prime, terce, sext, and so on, each marked by bells, each pulling you back to the chapel for more prayer. Your knees begin to ache. Your thoughts drift. Sometimes, during the quieter hours, you catch yourself drifting. Your mind strays to the memory of a family you've not seen in years, to the sound of laughter, or the feeling of your bare feet in grass. But thoughts are dangerous. There are priests who listen for them. Spiritual confessors trained to detect sloth, vanity, or doubt. Your silence, once sacred, becomes suspect. At evening, vespers are sung. The harmonies are beautiful, aching, even. It is the one moment of the day when your soul feels light, lifted. But even beauty is bound in discipline. You are expected to sleep by sundown. But sleep is no gift here. You are encouraged to sleep little, to spend the night in contemplation or vigil. Some nuns tie their wrists to the bedpost. Others lie on straw mats with pebbles beneath them. Each shift in the night a reminder of Christ's suffering. And so, by the third hour of the morning, when matins are called once again, your body aches. Your knees throb. Your mind drifts like smoke. And sometimes, you nod off for a moment too long. One breath, one blink. And if someone is watching, it could be reported, not to the abbess, but to someone far more dangerous. Because in 17th century Spain, the Inquisition had eyes in the cloister. And falling asleep wasn't merely seen as exhaustion. It was interpreted as spiritual rebellion, as a sign of demonic temptation. Now, let us follow that idea into the life of the woman who dared to close her eyes. Let us turn our attention to a particular case, drawn from inquisitorial records, hidden letters, and cloistered chronicles. The nun's name was Sister Benedetta, though some sources offer variations. Her story survives only in fragments. But fragments, when placed together, tell much. She was young, no older than 20 when she joined the convent of Santa Maria della Visitazione in Castile. A noble-born girl, placed in the care of the church to protect family honor, or perhaps to avoid a costly dowry. Her letters, where they exist, are careful and reverent. She writes of humility, of duty, of a desire to serve God with every breath. But between the lines, one senses weariness. She was known, in her early years, for her devotion. She fasted longer than required. She volunteered for the harshest chores. She was even said to kneel so long in vigil that her legs would tremble beneath her. But slowly, things changed. At some point, Sister Benedetta began to show signs of fatigue. She missed a few early prayers. She stammered through verses. And once, just once, she was seen nodding off during the canonical hours. Another sister saw it. Perhaps it was out of concern, or perhaps envy. But the act was reported, and not to the abbess. To the local inquisitorial delegate, a man named Fray Martín de Almeida. Fray Martín was not cruel in the way one might imagine. He did not storm into the convent with fire and chains. He wrote a letter, polite, respectful, and final. It stated simply that a report of spiritual laxity had been made, and that, due to the severity of recent heretical outbreaks, even small deviations must be examined closely. It was 1626. Only decades earlier, whole communities had been put to the question for far less. The memory of earlier purges lingered like incense. The abbess had no choice but to comply. Sister Benedetta was quietly separated from her sisters. Her cell was searched, her devotional books inspected for marginalia, symbols, or suspicious markings. They found nothing, except perhaps, beneath the mattress, a worn ribbon. The color was red. No one knew why that mattered, but they wrote it down anyway. The investigation escalated. 2 friars came to question her. They asked about her dreams, about moments of doubt, about whether she ever felt a presence during prayer. She denied all, gently, repeatedly, without anger. But to the friars, her very calmness was suspicious. They believed the devil teaches silence, that the accused often appear serene before they confess. So they watched. They monitored her during everything, during prayer, during meals, even during silence. And one night, one of them claimed to hear her whispering in her sleep. He believed she was reciting names. When asked, Sister Benedetta said only that she dreamed of her family. That, too, was written down. Soon, she was placed in isolated penance. Not yet torture, though close. Her meals were reduced. Her prayers doubled. And she was forbidden to speak even in confession. This lasted 8 days. On the 9th, the friars returned. They read a passage from the Directorium Inquisitorum, the handbook of the Holy Office. It stated clearly that repeated spiritual sloth could be the result of diabolical influence. They asked again, did she fall asleep often? Had she felt heat on her skin during prayer? Did shadows ever move when she closed her eyes? Sister Benedetta did not know what to say. Her faith remained, but her strength was leaving her. And her silence, once considered virtue, had become a mark of guilt. At this point, she was moved. Not far, just to the chamber beneath the chapel. It was stone-walled, with a single grated window above the altar. The sisters called it the lower room. The friars called it the place of purification. What happened there was not officially classified as torture, but neither was it gentle. She was asked to kneel for hours on bare flagstones. She was asked to recite the Psalms backward. She was denied sleep for nearly 3 days. At one point, she was presented with a relic, a bone said to belong to a saint who resisted temptation. They asked her to hold it. They told her it would burn if she were impure. It did not burn, but she trembled, and the tremble was enough. More accusations followed. One friar said he saw her speak during sleep again. Another claimed her rosary smelled of sulfur. The abbess, now terrified, withdrew. Sister Benedetta was effectively no longer a member of the convent. After 17 days, a tribunal was convened. 3 priests, 1 lay scribe, and a notary sat at a stone table. She stood before them, barefoot, in her threadbare habit. They asked the final question, did she ever doubt? Had she ever believed her suffering unnecessary? She paused. She said, I only wanted rest. I did not mean to offend heaven. And that was the moment the record breaks. Some say she was quietly returned to her cell. Others believe she was transferred to a monastery in Seville. Still others whisper that she was found dead 2 days later, kneeling, eyes open, in the same position they left her in. The official record ends with a single sentence. The matter was deemed resolved in accordance with the faith. But what it resolved, no one can say. The story of Sister Benedetta, while rare in detail, was not rare in structure. Across Europe, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of similar cases flicker through the margins of Inquisition records. Some names survive. Most do not. What they shared was a single thread: the suspicion that piety, when not performed perfectly, might conceal heresy. This fear was not born in a vacuum. By the early 1600s, the Catholic Church was no longer merely reacting to Protestantism. It was defending itself from within. The Inquisition, founded in the 12th century and empowered through papal bulls, had evolved. Its original purpose, to identify heretics, had expanded. It now judged thought, doubt, even fatigue. In Spain, this authority was nearly absolute. Convents were technically autonomous, but inquisitors could override abbesses, interrogate nuns, and remove them with little notice. And so, a strange culture developed, one in which spiritual behavior was carefully watched. Especially among women, it was interpreted and sometimes weaponized. Historians now refer to this as performative orthodoxy. That is, you weren't just required to believe. You were required to look like you believed, every day, without falter. And nowhere was this more fragile than among cloistered nuns. Women expected to live lives of constant devotion, to renounce the world, their names, and their desires, but also to remain visible examples of moral strength. This dual expectation created tension, because when a nun faltered, even by accident, it wasn't merely her own weakness. It was interpreted as a crack in the institution. One of the strangest cultural artifacts from this period is the visitation chart. Found in some archives, these were lists maintained by abbesses or confessors. They tracked when each nun attended prayer, who cried, who fainted, who stayed awake through midnight vigils. In some cases, small symbols marked suspicion: a flame, a question mark, a cross with a line through it. What began as spiritual discipline quietly morphed into surveillance. And yet, many nuns were not passive victims. Within the rigid boundaries of cloister life, some carved out subtle forms of resistance. They wrote letters, kept journals, created coded poetry. In one convent in Toledo, researchers uncovered a collection of flowered prayers. Each was a traditional psalm, but written on parchment shaped like petals, hidden in books. The petals contained commentary, fears, dreams. Some even joked about the friars. These writings never left the convent, until centuries later. And yet, they tell us that even under watchful eyes, these women retained a kind of inner life. But not all were so lucky. Archaeological digs at former convents sometimes reveal what the records do not. Burial sites marked only with initials. Stone cells beneath chapels with scorch marks on the walls. And once, beneath a monastery in Navarre, a hidden room with a single iron ring bolted to the floor. No names, no context, just evidence of restraint. It is tempting to assume these were places of torture, but scholars urge caution. Some may have been used for fasting, voluntary penance, solitary meditation. And yet, when read alongside inquisitorial records, the pattern grows clearer. Isolation, silence, repetition. These were tools, both spiritual and judicial. And there is another mystery. Some nuns, accused of sloth or heresy, vanished from the records entirely. Not executed, not banished, just absent. Historians now suspect that in certain cases, convents quietly buried their own scandals. Rather than submit a sister to public trial, they might claim she had been transferred, or fallen ill, or, most tragically, entered a state of mystical silence. This euphemism, silentia mystica, appears in 17th century records. It refers to a condition where the nun no longer speaks, eats, or reacts. Some believed it was spiritual ecstasy. Others feared it was madness brought on by isolation. Modern psychiatry might recognize it as catatonia. Whatever its true cause, it was often treated with the same rituals as demonic possession: prayer, binding, fasting. In extreme cases, exorcism. Which brings us back to Sister Benedetta. Was her fatigue the result of doubt or exhaustion? Was her silence a virtue or a symptom? We will never know for sure. But the cultural world she lived in tells us one thing clearly. For women of the cloister, there was no safe way to be imperfect. Not in word, not in gesture, not even in rest. While Sister Benedetta knelt on stone floors and recited the Psalms through weary lips, another world flourished just beyond the cloister walls. A world of lace gloves, perfumed letters, and golden crucifixes worn more as fashion than faith. Let us imagine the household of a noble Spanish family in the same city, Toledo, perhaps, or Valladolid. Their daughter, Luisa, was born just 2 years before Benedetta. But her life would be profoundly different. Luisa's mornings began with silken bedding and warm bread. A maid might light the hearth before she woke. Her day, though full of obligations, was dictated by etiquette, not prayer bells. Her world was one of comfort and choice. She would be taught to read, but mostly poetry and scripture, not Latin. She would learn embroidery, lute playing, and the delicate art of conversation. Her posture would be corrected with a stick laid across her back. Her voice, trained to be pleasant but not assertive. Luisa's greatest concern might be a stain on her bodice, or a postponed courtship. She prayed, yes, but prayer was part of performance. A public ritual before suitors arrived. A visible mark of chastity and grace. Unlike Sister Benedetta, she had choices. Though constrained by gender, Luisa could marry. She could write letters. She could walk in the city garden under chaperone. Her faith was not trial but tradition. For women like Luisa, the church was both ally and ornament. The local bishop might dine with her father. Their family priest was often a cousin. And should scandal arise, a flirtation, a servant's rumor, it could be handled quietly. A donation to the cathedral. A pilgrimage, perhaps. Certainly not the Inquisition. Not for her. Now imagine, in contrast, a priest of the Holy Office, like Fray Martín de Almeida, a man trained not in faith alone, but in judgment. He lived in austere quarters, yes, but with influence that reached every corner of society. His power lay in fear. He could summon nobles to inquiry. He could silence books, confiscate land. He could even exile entire families. And unlike the nuns, he was rarely questioned. The Inquisition, though often portrayed as a shadowy institution, was deeply embedded in Spain's elite structure. Many inquisitors were themselves nobles or rose to be bishops, archbishops, even viceroys. They were feared, yes, but also respected. To them, purity of faith was not merely spiritual. It was political, and every flicker of rebellion, especially among women, was treated as a threat. Even the Queen could not fully ignore them. Isabel of Bourbon, wife of Philip IV, was known for her piety. But she too walked carefully, ensuring her devotion aligned with doctrine. So we see a strange divide. In public, the church was a symbol of order and tradition. In private, it was a mechanism of control. For some, that control was gentle. For others, it was absolute. Even within the church, rank dictated experience. Abbesses of wealthy convents lived with relative comfort, writing letters to kings. They wore finer habits, hosted visitors, received correspondence. But younger nuns, especially those without noble families, lived under stricter discipline. Their voices were quiet, their doubts varied, and when suspicion arose, those same voices struggled to be heard. Because in the cloister, silence could be survival or sentence. So when a nun like Sister Benedetta faltered, when her eyes closed during prayer, the punishment wasn't just for her. It was a message to the other sisters, to the city beyond, to anyone who wondered if silence might be safety. The warning was clear. In the eyes of the Inquisition, even innocence could look like guilt. Was a spiritual battleground. In the palace, it was merely rest. The cost of error depended on your gender. Sister Benedetta's name does not appear in monuments. No relics are kept in her honor. No miracles claimed in her wake. And yet, her story lingers, in records, in footnotes, in the cold spaces of vanished convent walls. She reminds us how fragile faith becomes when it is surveilled, how silence can be both sanctuary and sentence. In our modern world, it's easy to forget what danger once lay in something as human as fatigue. But for Benedetta, and for many others, a blink too long could change the course of a life. One slip, not of faith, but of endurance, could provoke suspicion, interrogation, and even removal. To sleep was to risk everything. So tonight, as you drift off, unwatched, unjudged, spare a thought for those who couldn't afford to close their eyes. And remember, even in history's quietest corners, there are stories still whispering. Stories of courage in silence, of exhaustion mistaken for rebellion, and of women punished for being too human in a world that demanded perfection. Benedetta's ordeal is a testament to an era that sought to sanctify control. Her fatigue, her silence, her dreams, each was scrutinized as if divine truth lay hidden in their shadows. But it wasn't truth they sought. It was conformity. And in that pursuit, they forgot the simplest truth of all. even the devout must rest. For those nuns who survived such trials, peace often came not through absolution, but through time. Records faded. Accusations blurred. Some returned to their convent cells. Others disappeared into history's margins. But the fear, that ever-present fear, remained. It echoed in every whisper, every bowed head, every sleepless night beneath cold stone. And though inquisitors came and went, the system endured. Cloisters remained spaces of devotion, yes, but also of surveillance, of suspicion, and in many ways, of suffering. It is this contradiction that makes stories like Benedetta's so vital. They remind us not just of what happened, but of how power dressed itself as holiness. So as the world outside changed, empires rose and fell, wars were fought and forgotten. Within the cloister, little changed. The bells still rang, the psalms were still sung, and the expectations remained. Be faithful, be silent, be unwavering. Even if it cost you your body, even if it cost you your mind. For every Benedetta remembered, how many were lost? How many voices silenced before they could even form doubt? The records are sparse. The names are few. But the weight of their collective experience still hangs over our understanding of faith, of gender, of obedience, and of the brutal cost of being too tired to pray. Perhaps Benedetta's greatest act of defiance was not a protest or escape, but enduring the questions, the rituals, the stone floor, the suspicion. She endured not to prove herself holy, but because she had nowhere else to go. Because, like so many women of her time, her fate was sealed by expectation. And yet, even sealed fates leave traces. In journals, in court records, in scorched cell walls. These are the echoes of the voiceless, the fragments of lives too often erased. We owe them remembrance, not as saints, but as women, as humans, as those who, through sleep-deprived eyes, still dared to look toward heaven. What Sister Benedetta endured was not a tragedy of a single moment, but of a system designed to sanctify suffering. She wasn't burned. She wasn't publicly executed. Her punishment was quieter, more insidious. It was isolation, suspicion, the erasure of self beneath ritual and fear, wrapped in the language of salvation. And yet, her name survived, not through reverence, but through resilience, through the scribbled margins of inquisitorial transcripts, through whispered stories passed between novices, through fragments scholars would one day piece together. She may not have been meant to be remembered, but she was. Every line written about her now is an act of reclamation, a refusal to let her slip silently into the void. For history, too, is a form of prayer. When we remember Benedetta, we honor those like her. Women who endured, who suffered, who were never meant to have their stories told, but whose silence speaks volumes. This is not just a story about faith or punishment. It is about vigilance, about how institutions can blur the sacred and the cruel, about the cost of obedience, and about the danger of a world where falling asleep is seen as a threat to the divine. In telling her story, we peel back the veil on an era that preferred shadows. We expose the architecture of fear beneath the walls of holy sanctity. And we remind ourselves that piety, when demanded through force, is no longer faith, it is fear dressed in robes. The convent where Benedetta lived may now be dust, its records fading, its walls gone. But within this story, the echoes return. We can still feel the chill of those stone corridors, still hear the bells, still see the figure of a young woman, kneeling long after the others have gone. If her voice trembled, it was not weakness, it was defiance. If her eyelids dropped, it was not sin, it was survival. And if her silence lingered, it was not shame, but strength held within restraint. Benedetta's quiet endurance becomes a monument, unseen but unshaken. Let her stand among the forgotten not as a relic of failure, but as a symbol of humanity. A woman who suffered under the weight of impossible expectations, and who, despite it all, remained. Her story challenges the notion of what holiness looks like, and asks us, who decides what devotion should cost? In the end, we don't need to know exactly how she died, whether in a cold cell or quietly at prayer. What matters is that she lived, that she endured a world built to break her spirit, that she knelt and woke and wept, and in doing so, etched her memory into time. And so, as you finish this story, let one final image remain with you. A candle flickering in a stone chapel, long after the chanting has stopped. A girl in a habit, eyes closed, not in rebellion, but in exhaustion, in peace, in the hope that someone, someday, would remember her. And now you have.